This Lego keychain belongs to my son, and the medallion inside of this outer ring can rotate on the two pivot points, upper and lower. What has happened is the lower pivot point has fallen out of the keychain. So what I'm going to do is replace it today. Now what I've noticed is a little bit of measuring. I took a steel drill bit. This is 3/32. It's a little too large for the hole. So what we're going to do is put this in a 3/32 inch collet chuck. We'll put it on our lathe, and using some sandpaper or possibly a file, we're going to take this bit down just a little bit so that it fits nicely inside of the medallion. Now, another thing I noticed by measuring is the hole on the outer ring is even smaller, just by a fraction, than the hole in the medallion. So what we're going to do is take another 3/32 inch bit, and we're going to enlarge this hole so that we can insert the insert the drill bit. We'll cut off the length we need through this hole into the medallion, and then we'll epoxy it into the hole at the bottom of the key ring, and that should take care of repairing his Lego keychain. I grabbed a smaller drill bit. Now this one is way too small to be used. There's a lot of play in there, but it's perfect to measure the depth of the hole inside of the medallion. I transfer that depth to the bit in the collet chuck, and now we're going to sand down only the lower half of this bit because we need the upper half where we cut it off to remain 3/32 of an inch, because that's the size or the diameter of the hole that we'll drill in the outer ring, and we need it to be tight fitting so that we can epoxy it into place. I've got a 120 grit piece of sandpaper. My lathe is set to a speed of about 840 RPMs. Let's see if we can't take the size down on this bit just a little bit. Let's test fit our medallion. Oh, it's close. It's starting to want to fit on there. We're going to go a little bit farther. Let me fix that line so I can keep an eye on it. And I'm just putting pressure on the back half of the bit because we know the front half fits into the medallion. Do a test fit. I wonder if the hole tapers a tiny... Oh, you know what? I'll bet originally the hole had threads in it, and I used a smaller bit to measure, so I'll bet that's why this is having trouble fitting in there, because it's probably hitting the threads. Let me try taking the front of this down just a tiny bit in an effort to sort of taper it. Let's give it a test fit now. Oh, check that out. That's going to be perfect. Absolutely perfect. Now, you'll notice my little black mark is about a 1/16 of an inch farther back. So this doesn't go all the way into the medallion, and I did that on purpose. What we'll do now is I've sanded it up to that line, so we'll start removing material from the end until we hit that line. Then we'll come back and remove just a tiny bit more material because when this gets inserted into the outer ring, I don't want the bottom of this to be bottoming out against the inside of the medallion. I want there to be a little bit of a gap there so that it spins freely. Otherwise, I pinch it too tightly between the upper and the lower pivot points, and it could cause a problem. So let me go ahead and get a Dremel tool, and then we'll start cutting this bit down to the proper length. I've got a fresh fiberglass cutting disc on the Dremel, and you can see I've marked the end of the bit. I'm going to cut to the left of that line. Because there's a little burr on the end of the bit, I'm just going to use a file. I'm just going to kind of clean that up a little bit. It's almost like it got magnetized there because you can see the filing sticking to the bit. Do a quick test fit. We're going to go right up to the line, and if you'll notice, it goes just a hair past it, which is what I want. I brought the outer ring over, and if I lay the medallion against it, you can probably see just the difference in the hole sizes. The medallion is a little bit larger than the outer ring, so I'm going to come up with a way to grip this squarely without damaging it. And then when I can grip it, I'll take it over to my drill press, and we're going to widen this hole out to 3/32 of an inch. I'm going to use my pin vise to hold the center ring. And here's what I did. I've got a couple shims on either side of the ring to protect it. I've got it clamped between the jaws, and if we spin it around like this, you can see that I've got a square back here laying on the back jaw, and I simply eyeballed the bit and aligned it with the square as best as I could, and I'm ready to take it over to my drill press and widen the hole. I'm set up over at the drill press, and I'm going to use just a little bit of 3-in-1 oil because I don't have any cutting oil to hopefully keep the bit cool and allow it to cut a little easier into the ring. Okay, I believe we've successfully widened the hole. Not too bad. Let's get this cleaned up and move on to the next step. After enlarging the hole in the outer ring, I have inserted both the outer ring and the medallion onto the lathe. You can see we're still centered nicely, and it spins freely, so I'm very happy about that. What I'm going to do next is we're going to remove this from the collet chuck because I need to mark the bit so that I can cut it off, and it's a little difficult to mark it because there's just not enough room between the outer ring and the chuck. So I'm going to get that marked. We'll get it back into the collet chuck, and then we'll get it cut so that we can look next to gluing it into the outer ring. I've got the bit marked. You can see my black line right there. And we're ready to cut it off. Now we need to cut dead on the line because that'll make it just a hair proud of the outer ring, and then we can file or sand it down so that it fits nice and smooth against the ring right before we epoxy it into place. I dipped our newly made pin in a little bit of water to cool it down because, trust me, it was going to be hot. I'm going to lay it aside and I'm going to lay it in a proper orientation to know that this is the larger end. I did a nice job cutting the bit because it is relatively flush with the bottom of the outer ring. If I put a finger on there so that it doesn't fall out, haven't glued it in yet, you can see that I can still spin the medallion freely, which is important. That's what we want. I can tell you, though, that if I squeeze tightly, simulating the pin being glued in, that it doesn't really want to spin that freely because the pin is pressing against the inside of the medallion. So what I want to do is back the pin out, and I want to file off a little bit more of the opposite end of this medallion so that there's a little bit of a gap between the pin and the bottom of the hole in the medallion. That will keep it spinning freely on the pin that I made. I'm going to grip the pin with a pair of needle nose pliers to protect my fingers from the cutting disc as well as the heat that we're going to be generating. And we're just going to grind away a little bit of material at the end of the pin. I'm hoping that's enough. I'm going to dip this in some water, and then we're going to test fit, and if we need to, we'll take a little more away. Very nice. We are just slightly below surface with the pin, and what I think I'm going to do, instead of gluing the pin into the outer ring, I think I'll glue the pin into the medallion. That way it will surely be allowed to spin freely. Let's get the epoxy ready. Once again, I'm going to employ my pin vise with a couple of shims to hold the outer ring. Now this time you'll notice that the hole is a little off center. That's not going to hurt us. We just need it to remain in this position so that any epoxy will stay inside of the medallion and not leak out and gluing it permanently to the outer ring. I've grabbed a very small bit here. This is way smaller than the inside of the hole in our medallion, and we're going to use this to spread the epoxy inside the medallion. We'll wipe off the outside of the medallion with our paper towel. Then we can seat it, press our pin in, and let it dry overnight. I got a little too much of the hardener, so I'm just going to grab a small portion of it to mix in. We do not need a lot of epoxy here. Okay, and we'll get a little bit. And I'm going to put this right inside of, I'm trying not to slop it everywhere. Get it inside of the medallion. I'll wipe my bit off so that it's not ruined. And then we'll wipe off the outside of the medallion. It looks pretty good. I didn't get much on it. Okay, let's go ahead and put it into, we'll seat the top, making sure we have Lego pointing in the right direction. And then I'll drop my pin in. Okay, into the hole. Nice, nice. And I'll use this to kind of guide the pin. What's wanting to happen is the pin is wanting to bounce out because of the epoxy in the inside of the medallion. You know what? That's really not going to be a huge deal. Let me put a piece of tape over this to hold it down while it dries. I'm going to double up the tape, and this will just kind of give me a little more protection against the pin poking through it. I think my pin is going to end up being too long because the epoxy is taking up room at the bottom of the hole, but that's all right. We can actually come back and sand that away and make it smooth. So what we're going to do is leave this now overnight. I'm just going to make sure there's no squeeze out, and I don't see any. We're going to leave it overnight. I'll come back tomorrow. We will remove the tape, clean up any excess pins sticking out of the outer ring, and it should be ready for him to put his keys back on the ring and start using it again. I'll let the keychain set overnight, let the glue dry, and it did a pretty good job. We can spin freely the medallion. I did have a little bit of overhang on the pin down here at the bottom, so I took it to my disc sander and sanded it off. I did a pretty good job. I actually nicked it right there so you can see a little bit below the plating, but that's not anything that's going to hurt anything. I think he'll be really happy to have his keychain Lego medallion back.